You step into a workshop just outside Gordonville, Pennsylvania. The air smells of fresh cedar shavings and machine oil. In the corner, a massive chest freezer hums steadily, keeping 40 pounds of venison frozen rock solid. Overhead, bright lights illuminate a heavy-duty drill press as it bores cleanly through a block of oak. Everything looks normal until you walk outside and look at the exterior wall. There is no gray metal box, no glass face with a digital display, no spinning wheel, no wires stretching out to a pole on the road. For over 50 years, the 73-year-old carpenter who owns this shop hasn't paid a single penny to a utility company. Contrast that with the modern alternative. Today, a homeowner looking for independence is told to sign a 25-year bank loan for a $30,000 rooftop solar installation. A massive interconnected system tied directly to the utility grid. A system that, ironically, is designed to shut itself off completely the moment a storm knocks the main power lines down. You spend a fortune to secure your home, and when the street goes dark, your expensive panels become useless glass. It is a complex, expensive approach to a problem that was solved decades ago with simpler, quieter tools. My name is Eli Yoder. The man in that workshop is my neighbor, Aaron. When I first walked into his shop years ago, I spent 10 minutes doing what most folks do. Staring at the rafters, looking for hidden extension cords or a secret generator. There were none. All I found was a single solar panel resting against the south-facing barn wood, a battery the size of a small beer cooler tucked under a workbench, and a modest box humming softly between them. Aaron didn't need a physics degree or a government subsidy. He built it himself using less than $300 in basic components. Now, stop and think before your mind races ahead. I am not going to sit here and tell you that this $300 setup will run a central air conditioning system for a 5-bedroom suburban home or power an all-electric kitchen range. It won't. This is not a magic solution that duplicates the massive, wasteful output of a coal-fired power plant. It has strict, honest limitations. Where it works, however, is in the targeted defense of your independence. It is designed to handle one critical task and do it flawlessly without asking permission from anyone. Why have we been conditioned to think that powering a single appliance requires rewiring our entire lives? Why do we pay a monthly fee, year after year, just to maintain a connection to a middleman that can cut us off with the stroke of a pen? How did our grandfathers keep their homesteads functional before the grid became an inescapable utility? The answer lies in a piece of forgotten history. Back in 1923, a blacksmith's son named Elmer Yoder worked at a Delco light plant in Ohio. Delco sold small generator and battery banks to rural farms. Elmer noticed something profound. The true value wasn't in the noisy gasoline engine. The treasure was the storage bank. He took that old knowledge, stripped away the loud engine, and connected the storage cells to small, localized sources. A creek wheel, a small windmill. It was a localized solution. Decades later, in the late 1970s, when the first small solar panels appeared in farm co-op catalogs, that traditional knowledge resurfaced in Lancaster County. The old-timers didn't try to power a whole house at once. They looked at the problem differently. They developed what they called a direct task circuit. Understand this. Instead of one giant system powering everything poorly, you use small, independent systems, each dedicated to a single specific job. One panel, one battery, one appliance. Think of the massive electrical grid like a cross-country water pipeline. By the time the water travels hundreds of miles through high-pressure transmission lines and transformers, a significant amount of energy is lost to the atmosphere. But the biggest loss isn't physics. It's the massive corporate infrastructure bolted onto those lines. You are paying for the meters, the billing departments, the corporate salaries, and the fuel surcharges printed in tiny ink at the bottom of your statement. A simple solar panel sitting 20 feet away from the chest freezer. It powers has no middleman. The sun hits the dark silicon cells. Current flows down a thick copper wire, and your food stays cold. There is no bill in the mailbox at the end of the month because there is no one to write it. Over the years, this quiet method was preserved through handwritten manuals, typed on old mechanical machines, with wiring diagrams sketched in pencil. Passed from workshop to workshop, it bypasses the regulations of the 1978 Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act because it never touches the grid. It requires no permits, no structural changes, and no professional installation. It is simple, safe, and entirely within the reach of anyone who can turn a screwdriver. You can apply this exact logic to your own home tomorrow morning, starting with the single appliance that drains your pocketbook the most. But to do it safely, to ensure the battery lasts for 15 years instead of 15 weeks, and to make sure you never risk a short circuit, you must know how these pieces connect. You must understand how to balance the flow of current so that even during a week of gray, overcast skies, your freezer keeps humming without a moment of interruption. Let us look at exactly how we lay these pieces out on the bench and how to safely bring this old knowledge into your own modern life. Clear off your workbench. Clear it down to the bare wood. If you want to build this right, you need space to look at your tools and respect the process. When you lay these 5 components out side by side, the mystery evaporates. What you have in front of you is a miniature, self-contained power plant, and assembling it requires no specialized trade skills. Just a patient hand and a strict adherence to the proper order of operations. Let's begin with the foundation, the battery. Pick it up. It has a surprising weight to it, about 25 pounds, packed into a hard matte black composite case. This is a 100 amp-hour lithium iron phosphate battery. If you tap the casing, it feels solid, like a dense block of oak. On top, you will see 2 threaded brass terminals. One marked with a red ring for positive, the other with black for negative. Look closely at those terminals. They are clean, bright, and completely dry. Unlike the old lead-acid car batteries of the past, there is no faint, sour smell of sulfuric acid, no damp residue that will eat through your clothing. It is entirely sealed, stable, and inert. Next to it, lay down the charge controller. It is a small, lightweight box, usually encased in gray or black plastic, with a finned aluminum heatsink on the back to dissipate warmth. On its face is a small liquid crystal display, and along the bottom edge, you will find 6 screw terminals. Look at the icons stamped into the plastic above those screws. 2 are for a solar panel, 2 are for a battery, and 2 are for a direct low-voltage light or load. Now, understand this, and do not let your eyes wander past this point until it sinks in. The single biggest mistake a beginner makes happens right here. Before a single wire is even stripped, it is the temptation to plug the solar panel into the controller first, because the sun is shining and you want to see it work. If you do that, you will likely destroy the brain of that controller before you ever use it. The charge controller is a computer. It has no internal power of its own. It needs to drink from the battery first so it can wake up, sense whether your system is 12 volts or 24 volts, and calibrate its internal programming. If you feed it raw, unregulated voltage from a solar panel while its brain is still dark, it will overheat and burn out. The battery always connects first. Always let's prepare the bridge between the battery and the controller. Take a length of 10-gauge stranded copper wire. When you cut the thick red vinyl insulation with your wire strippers, you will catch that sharp, slightly sweet smell of fresh rubber and the metallic tang of bright copper. Twist the fine strands together so they form a neat, silver-plated cylinder. Before you attach this wire to the battery, we must install the gatekeeper, the fuse. Take an inline fuse holder, open its waterproof rubber cap, and look inside. You will drop a 30-amp fuse into this slot. Cut the red wire about 6 inches away from where it will attach to the positive battery terminal. Strip the ends and crimp the fuse holder tightly into the line. This small piece of plastic and metal costs less than $5, but it is your insurance policy. If you accidentally drop a wrench across the battery terminals later, This fuse will pop in a fraction of a second, cutting the current before a spark can turn into a flame. Take the stripped end of that fused red wire, insert it into the positive battery terminal slot on the charge controller, and tighten the screw down with your screwdriver. Give it a firm tug. It should not budge. Now take a corresponding length of black insulated wire, connect it to the negative slot on the controller, and tighten it down. Now, and only now, you take the other ends of these wires and connect them to the brass terminals of the battery, red to positive, black to negative. The moment that negative wire touches the brass, you will hear a faint, single click from inside the controller, and the little screen on its face will blink to life. It will display a number, likely somewhere around 13.2 volts. That is the voice of your battery, telling the controller it is ready. With the controller awake, we can bring in the sun. Step outside and look at your solar panel. It is a rigid, rectangular frame of silver anodized aluminum, holding a sheet of tempered glass over a grid of deep indigo blue silicon cells. In the bright daylight, those cells look almost black, absorbing the light. On the back of the panel, you will find a small junction box with two long wires extending out, terminating in hard plastic connectors known as MC4 clips. They are designed to be completely weatherproof. Bring those wires inside to your bench through a small hole or window gap. When you plug the extension cables into them, listen for the sharp, distinct snap of the plastic teeth locking together. That sound tells you the connection is sealed against rain, ice, and dust. Strip the bare ends of these solar wires. Insert the positive wire into the solar terminal, marked with a plus sign on the controller, and the negative into the minus sign. Watch the screen. Within a few seconds, a small icon of a solar panel or an arrow will appear on the display, pointing toward the battery icon. You might see a faint, rhythmic pulsing on the screen. That is the controller doing its work, stepping down the high voltage of the panel and gently pushing current into the battery cells. The final piece is the inverter. It is a sturdy aluminum box with a cooling fan on one end and standard 3-prong household outlets on the other. Make sure you chose a pure sine-wave inverter, not a modified one. A modified inverter produces choppy, blocky electrical waves that will cause the compressor motor in your chest freezer to run hot, buzz loudly, and eventually burn out. A pure sine-wave inverter produces electricity that is as smooth and clean as the water in a mountain stream, perfectly matching what comes out of a traditional utility wall socket. Here is the second trap for beginners. Do not connect the inverter to the load terminals on the charge controller. Those tiny screws cannot handle the massive surge of current that an appliance needs when it first starts up. The inverter must be wired directly to the battery terminals, running parallel to the controller. Use the heavy-gauge cables that came in the box with the inverter. Bolt them securely to the brass battery posts, tightening them with a wrench until they are snug. Flip the small toggle switch on the face of the inverter. You will hear a brief, high-pitched beep, followed by the quiet, steady whir of its internal fan. Look at what you have built. The sun hits the blue panel outside. The current travels down the wire, through the controller, and fills the black battery container. The inverter draws from that container, converting the direct current into standard 120-volt household power. The system is complete, balanced, and alive. But before you unplug your freezer from the utility company and bring it over to this bench, we must discuss the placement of the panel, the angle of the winter sky, and how to verify that your specific appliance won't overwhelm the storage you've created. This is where the theory meets the physical reality of your backyard. Stop and think about what is actually happening inside those blue silicon cells when the sun hits them. We do not need a laboratory coat or a university tenure to understand the physics, because nature always provides a simpler picture if we know where to look. Think of a solar panel less like a complex electronic instrument and more like a tin roof during a steady summer rain. The sunlight falling from the sky is not just illumination. It is a physical force, a continuous hail of tiny packets of energy called photons. When those photons strike the specially treated silicon layers of the panel, they act exactly like raindrops hitting a puddle. They knock things loose. Specifically, they knock electrons free from the silicon atoms. Understand this. Electricity is nothing more than electrons in motion. The panel does not create energy out of thin air. It simply provides a sloped channel, like a clean gutter on that tin roof, that forces those loosened electrons to flow in one single direction. This steady one-way stream is what we call direct current, or DC. It flows down the wire with a quiet, predictable regularity, entirely unlike the erratic, massive power grid outside. To understand how we manage this current on the bench, we must use the old analogy of water. Because electricity behaves almost exactly like fluid moving through a network of wooden sluices or iron pipes. Think of your battery not as a mysterious chemical black box, but as a water cistern sitting on a frame. The voltage of your system is the water pressure, the physical force pushing the fluid through the line. The amperage is the volume of water flowing through the pipe per second. When we say a battery is a 12-volt, 100 amp-hour unit, we are simply describing the depth of the cistern and the total volume of water it can hold before it runs dry. The charge controller we connected earlier is the mechanical float valve at the top of that cistern. Left to itself, a solar panel will keep pushing current into the battery even when the storage cells are entirely full, like a creek pump that refuses to shut off when the barrel is already overflowing. In the old days, with the heavy lead-acid batteries my grandfather used, an overflow meant the fluid would boil away, releasing a sour explosive hydrogen gas and warping the heavy lead plates inside the casing. With modern lithium iron phosphate chemistry, an overcharge is even more destructive. It causes the internal molecular structure to break down permanently. The controller senses the internal pressure, the voltage, and when it sees the battery reach its full level, it turns the valve down to a mere trickle, protecting the investment sitting on your bench. But your standard household appliances cannot drink directly from this steady DC cistern. The electricity coming out of your standard wall outlet is alternating current, or AC. It does not flow in a continuous one-way stream like a river. Instead, it pushes and pulls back and forth, reversing its direction 60 times every single second. Think of it like a two-man crosscut saw, cutting through a thick log of seasoned hickory. The saw moves back and forth, doing immense work in both directions, but never actually traveling away from the log. Your chest freezer's compressor motor is engineered specifically to look for that rhythmic, sawing motion. The inverter's sole purpose is to take the steady, one-way current from your battery cistern and use its internal electronic switches to shake it back and forth rapidly, mimicking that 60-cycle pulse perfectly so the motor recognizes the power. Now, let us speak with total honesty about the hard boundaries of this method, because I will not hand you a tool without showing you exactly where its edge grows dull. Every system has its limits, and the old-timers who survived by their own hands succeeded because they respected those limits, not because they pretended they didn't exist. Electricity performs work in two primary ways. It can create motion through magnetic fields, or it can create heat through electrical resistance. Understand this distinction clearly, because it determines whether your $300 system succeeds or fails. Look at an electric space heater, a kitchen toaster, an oven, or a domestic water heater. Inside these appliances, the current is forced through thick, tightly coiled, high-resistance wires. The metal wire fights the current, and that intense friction generates raw heat. This process is incredibly hungry. It requires a massive, continuous volume of electrons, moving all at once. If you take a standard 1500-watt space heater and plug it into our small circuit, you are attempting to drain a 500-gallon water cistern through a massive floodgate. The inverter will groan, its cooling fans will scream, and within 5 to 10 minutes, The battery's internal management system will trip its safety switch to prevent the cells from melting from the inside out. This $300 circuit will not heat your home. It will not cook your food. It will not run a hot water heater. If your goal is to take a resistance heating appliance off the grid, this simple method is a dead end. Where this system excels, however, is with inductive loads and low-voltage electronics. An inductive load is an appliance that uses electricity to create a magnetic field that spins an internal motor, like the compressor inside your chest freezer or the motor on a workshop drill press. These devices require a heavy gulp of power for a single second just to break the static inertia and get the heavy flywheel turning, what we call the starting or surge wattage. But once the motor is spinning and the compressor is moving, the power requirement drops to a fraction of the initial pull. A modern chest freezer is a marvel of passive insulation. The motor does not run continuously. It kicks on for 15 minutes, cools the interior down, and then shuts off for 45 minutes while the thick foam walls hold the frost inside. This gives your small system a massive natural advantage. It allows the battery to rest and cool down, and it gives the solar panel ample time to gently refill the cistern during the daylight hours. The same logic applies to a drill press or a bandsaw. You use them intermittently. You drill a hole for 30 seconds. Then the tool sits idle while you measure the next piece of oak. The total energy consumed over the course of a day is remarkably small. We must also look at the honest limitations imposed by weather and geography. Sunlight is not a guaranteed commodity, and a solar panel is highly sensitive to its immediate environment. If a single branch from a backyard walnut tree casts a narrow shadow across even 10% of your solar panel, the output does not drop by a mere 10%. It can drop by 80% or more. The silicon cells inside the aluminum frame are wired together like links in a heavy logging chain. If you throw a dark shadow over one link, you choke the flow of current through the entire length of the cable. Your panel must have a completely clear, unobstructed view of the southern sky between the hours of 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, or the system will starve. Furthermore, winter changes the geometry of self-sufficiency entirely. In places like Pennsylvania or Ohio, the summer sun rides high and bright in the sky, pouring energy down for 14 hours a day. But in December, the sun sinks low, scraping just above the tree line for a brief gray 6 or 7 hours. If your panel is mounted flat against a wall or left at a shallow summer angle, the weak winter light will simply bounce off the glass without knocking a single electron loose. To survive the winter, you must tilt that panel steeply, nearly 60 degrees, so it faces the low sun directly and allows the heavy winter snow to slide off its face onto the ground rather than burying the cells. Finally, you must understand the mathematics of a cloudy week. A 100 amp-hour lithium battery holds roughly 1,200 watt-hours of gross energy. Because we want this battery to last 15 years on the bench, we only draw it down 80%, leaving us with about 1,000 watt-hours of usable storage. A modern, efficient chest freezer consumes between 500 and 700 watt-hours every 24 hours. Look at that balance sheet. Your battery cistern holds enough power to carry that freezer through one full day of thick, dark rain clouds or a heavy winter storm. But if the skies remain leaden and gray into a second or a third day, the panel will not generate enough pressure to refill the tank, and the inverter will shut down to protect the system from deep discharge. Aaron didn't overcome this problem by buying a bigger system. He overcame it by changing his expectations and understanding how the seasons behave. He knew how to read the sky, how to prepare his storage, and when to expect the lean days. Now that you understand the science of the flow and the strict, honest boundaries of what this small circuit can and cannot do, you are ready to look at how we manage this system over the long haul, how we troubleshoot the connections, maintain the hardware, and live with it day by day without ever looking for a utility company to save us. The story of Elmer Yoder back in 1923 wasn't an isolated spark of ingenuity. It was simply the first link in a continuous chain of practical knowledge that has survived precisely because it remained hidden from the commercial market. To truly understand why my neighbor Aaron can stand in his workshop tonight, with his tools running and his freezer humming without an electric meter, you have to look at how these communities navigated the slow transition into the modern era. For generations, the primary source of illumination after dusk was the kerosene lamp. It was a simple tool, but it carried a distinct heavy scent. The sharp, oily smell of burning fuel that clung to the curtains and left a fine layer of black soot on the glass chimneys. By the mid-1970s, many families transitioned to natural gas lighting, plumbing their homes and workshops with narrow iron pipes to feed stationary wall lamps that cast a bright, white glow. It was a marked improvement, but it still required a dependency on an outside fuel provider. Walnut Creek, Ohio, in Ohio's Amish country, when the first small single-crystal photovoltaic cells began appearing in the back pages of agricultural supply catalogs in the early 1980s. The old-timers didn't see an expensive high-tech novelty. They saw a direct extension of Elmer Yoder's old principle, a clean, quiet way to fill a battery storage tank without a gasoline engine rattling in the yard. When you look at the formal documentation, the reality of this traditional movement becomes completely undeniable. In October of 2008, a definitive account of this practical shift was published in the Christian Science Monitor. Researchers tracking the economic and cultural habits of Lancaster County documented that local alternative energy practitioners, including men like Sam Zook of Belmont Solar in Gordonville, were experiencing a massive 30 to 50% surge in the assembly of these small standalone systems. The documentation revealed a stark contrast between two completely different ways of thinking. While the mainstream consumer market was being pushed toward massive 10-kilowatt arrays tied directly to the utility lines, a quiet populace was busy installing independent, single-panel circuits dedicated strictly to single tasks: charging a buggy battery, running a pasture pump, or lighting a workshop bench. Modern agricultural extension studies and sociological research from places like Holmes County, Ohio, have since verified that this gradual adoption is exactly what allowed the technology to take root without fracturing the independence of the community. James Mast, a contemporary builder who spent years studying battery cell load balancing within these traditional boundaries, noted in public industry reports that if a family had tried to install a massive commercial-scale solar system overnight, the sheer complexity and cost would have been rejected by the elders. It grew gradually, one careful step at a time, because the focus was always kept on the specific chore at hand. Dan Beachy, another master practitioner from the Trail Battery and Solar Group in Ohio, documented that when families began purchasing older homes that were already wired into the utility grid, they didn't connect to the poles outside. Instead, they used the existing household wiring, but severed the connection at the wall, running those specific lines directly into small, isolated battery banks powered by the sun. Anabaptist world stop and think about the weight of that choice. The mainstream world has been trained to look at energy as a massive, centralized river that you must pay to access every single hour of your life. But traditional knowledge teaches us that energy is more like the rainwater that falls on your barn roof. You do not need to build a massive dam to capture the entire storm. You simply need a few clean barrels positioned under the downspouts to handle what you actually need to survive the day. Understand this. The system I have described to you over these pages is not a matter of folk superstition or primitive guesswork. It is fundamental physics, stripped of corporate architecture and administrative greed. The federal guidelines under the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1978 were designed to regulate the massive entities that trade power across state lines. But they have absolutely no jurisdiction over a standalone wire running from a single indigo blue panel on your garage wall to a black lithium battery on your floor. There is no law that prevents you from unplugging a chest freezer from the utility company and plugging it into an independent source that you built with your own two hands. Look at your own home. Look at the workspace where you spend your evenings, or the garage where your tools sit idle. The path to a quieter, more self-reliant life does not require you to sell your home, move to a remote wilderness, or abandon the comforts of modern life. It requires you to change your perspective on one single appliance at a time. Go out to a local farm co-op or an independent supply shop this week. Pick up a single 100-watt panel. Feel the heavy aluminum frame in your hands. Smell the fresh copper and rubber insulation as you strip the 10-gauge wire. And listen for that clean, solid click when the charge controller hooks into the battery terminals. Clear off your workbench, lay the manual open, put your fuses in place, and spend one quiet afternoon assembling your own direct task circuit. Connect your chest freezer, your workshop lights, or your water pump, and then simply sit back and watch your